everybody. So I just want a quick review where we've been, and then we'll talk about where we're going. So of course you know that we started off by knowing that your classic story of the Three Billy Goats Gruff or Little Red Riding Hood. Then you made some changes that you wanted to make to improve the story, and you had to think about how those changes were kind of like dominoes and how they were going to change things. If you changed a boy to a girl, what that was going to mean throughout your story. And then you kind of thought about your character. What are they going to be like? What do they want? What's the trouble that they're going to run into? And then hopefully you've told your story in 2 or 3 scenes. There's little small moments. And you did that by storytelling and acting out and putting in those lifelike details, all that action and dialogue and feeling. And then you hopefully have a few scenes done. So today what we're going to focus on is how do we figure out the ending. A lot of times the ending of a story is really hard, so that's what we're going to talk about today. And what you really need to be thinking about is how that main character solves their biggest problem. So our story that we're working on together, the big problem is that the stepbrothers don't want a new library, and they just want to play video games all the time. They don't think libraries are that important, so they're trying to sabotage the fundraiser. So what I need to do to get to the ending is I need to think about the classic story and how that story has an ending. And we know that in the classic story of Cinderella, the fairy godmother comes along and she lets her go to the ball and she leaves something behind, and that's what leads to the prince being able to find her. So we're going to have to do the same thing in our final scene, or towards our final scene. I'm going to have somehow get her to the ball, and then or to the fundraiser, and then I'm going to have her leave something behind. And I'm thinking, since it's a library, how about her library card, right? And she leaves behind her library card, and they find it right the next day when they're cleaning up, and that's how they get to her. And so do you see what I'm doing? I'm just trying to think about the classic story and then how that story went about. And then I'm thinking about my story, the big problem that's in my story, and thinking about how can I end my big problem. And so I'm thinking that one way to get the brothers on board is maybe she decides to put like a little video game area in this new high-tech library in one corner, and they kind of jump on board and they're a part of it, and they live happily ever after as a family because they realize that the library can be inclusive for everybody. People who love books, people who love to play video games, people who are into technology. So do you see how I'm just thinking about what my biggest problem is? Well, first I thought about the classic tale and how she left something behind. Remember, now I'm thinking I'm going to leave behind the library card. And then the last scene is going to be now, how do I tie everything up where the real Cinderella goes in and lives happily ever after with her prince? We don't really have that in my story, so how am I going to wrap everything up? Well, I'm thinking that they decide, you know what? How about we put some video games in the library and we use that in technology and like a maker space and a place for people to come and have fun, and she convinces her brothers that this will be a great place, and they live happily ever after working together to make this really awesome high-tech library. So as you work today, think about your ending, and remember, always go back to the classic tale and then think about how you're going to solve that problem as well. And don't forget about acting it out. That's the fun part, right? Because just like every other part of your story, we want to make sure that you include what happens to all the characters, that you change the happily ever after just a little bit, right? Mine's still a happily ever after. I'm still going to want to include actions. I'm still going to want to include any kind of personal touches that I have as a writer, and I want to make sure I solve the problem, right? No story can go on without a problem being solved, right? And of course I want dialogue, because all good stories have some kind of talking, right, between their characters, and that makes it interesting. So I know this is a lot, but you've got this. It's the end. You can finish strong by thinking about that last scene. How are you going to solve the problem, and how are the characters going to live happily ever after? Okay, take care. We'll see you soon.